Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I've been a security shift manager at Pairi Daiza in Belgium for the past 7 years. My younger brother Eli joined the team 4 years ago. We don't live on the zoo grounds, but when everything started falling apart, we moved into the old keeper lodges near the South American section, across the little bridge past the owl aviary. They were originally built for multi-day volunteers, but now they're our stronghold. 2 rooms, a backup generator, a cellar-sized pantry, and windows thick enough to make us feel slightly less exposed at night. Pairi Daiza isn't a city zoo, it's different. It's built on the grounds of the old Cistercian monastery of Cambron Abbey, a sprawling 160-acre estate surrounded by forest, farmland, and stone walls. The park is known for how freely animals move. Some species roam vast enclosures with minimal fencing. Most of the pandas, elephants, big cats, and primates have outdoor and indoor spaces linked by reinforced gates. That's what saved us at first. The zombies didn't breach the core until much later. When the government first issued civil lockdown notices across Wallonia, about half the staff didn't return after that weekend. People were panicking about Liège and Namur, then Brussels. I don't blame them. Some had kids. Some had family across the border. We were told to stay until the military set up formal quarantine routes. That never came. On March 9th, the internet cut out completely. Not just flaky service, gone. Landlines too. Our satellite emergency phone still worked on and off, but no one was answering. The last thing I heard before the signal died was a half-broken transmission from a local emergency coordination center in Mons, something about containment breaches, localized blackouts, and holding the perimeter until further notice. After that, we were on our own. I organized what staff we had left: 1 vet, Dr. Sabine Engels, 2 keepers from the primate and reptile teams, and a chef who stayed only because he didn't know where else to go. By day 4, they were all gone. Sabine tried to make it back to Leuven to find her daughter. The others just vanished one by one during the night. By day 6, it was just me, Eli, and the animals. We split duties fast. Eli monitored the enclosures and maintained the backup diesel generators. I secured gates, rationed food, and did the night rounds. We blocked off the visitor zones with steel fencing from the maintenance warehouse. We piled benches against the glass domes. We drained one of the koi ponds and filled it with clean reserve water from the elephant filtration station. That became our emergency supply. We still had dry feed for the hoof stock, refrigerated meat for the carnivores, and stacks of bamboo pallets for the pandas. But no way to resupply, no way to know what was happening outside the stone walls. We didn't sleep much that first week. No creature in the park did. The monkeys screamed for hours every night. The wolves howled at nothing. Even the tortoises were constantly on edge, moving erratically, as if they sensed something unnatural pressing against the walls of their world. By the end of day 6, we heard the first real breach. It happened near the African savanna section. Something, or someone, climbed over the east perimeter wall using the broken scaffolding left near the giraffe house. It must have happened just after dusk. The security cameras had frozen hours earlier, but the radio buzzed with motion alerts. Not from humans, not from keepers. From the tagged gates near the southern fence line, I checked the thermal monitor, heat signatures, but they were cold, wrong, moving slow. Eli and I grabbed what we had, an old hunting rifle from the caretaker's shed and my riot baton, and moved toward the ridge path above the elephant paddocks. I didn't speak, neither did he. You don't talk when the world ends, you listen. We caught sight of them near the zebra shelter, 6 of them, maybe more behind the brush. They weren't sprinting, they weren't groaning. No wild chaos like in movies, just walking. Some had parts of uniforms, a forestry jacket, a delivery vest. One woman had hospital scrubs and no shoes. They walked like they had nowhere to go, but they were moving in our direction, swerving only when blocked by hedges or inclines. One stumbled into the giraffe gate and got tangled in the feed netting. The animal kicked him hard enough to fold his body backward. It didn't make a sound, didn't even register pain, just kept trying to move forward until it broke its own spine, and still it twitched, still it clawed the ground. Eli lowered the rifle. He didn't shoot, not yet. I signaled for him to backtrack, and we retreated to the secondary lock gates near the Lima crossing bridge. We'd need to seal off the entire savannah sector by sunrise. The lock gates had been designed to funnel large maintenance vehicles through the habitat zones without opening multiple animal areas at once. They were reinforced steel, split into 4 segments, with cross-latch bolts big enough to stop a rhino. It took us over an hour to reseal them manually with hand tools because the electric controls had gone dead with the rest of the grid. Eli found a hydraulic jack in the utility barn, and we used it to shift the damaged hinges. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through the mist over the Chinese garden, we'd welded the gate closed with a torch kit I'd pulled from the welding shed 3 days earlier. That's how it was. No breaks, no panic attacks, no crying fits or deep conversations about what was lost. Just the work. Either you stayed in motion, or you started thinking too much, and thinking was dangerous out here now. We set up a rotating schedule. Eli covered midday patrols while I worked nights. We took turns feeding the carnivores, and we avoided the outer sectors as much as possible. Every day, we found signs of new breaches, claw marks in the garden maze, footprints in the mud outside the penguin compound. One morning, Eli found a shredded pair of shoes near the otter pools. No body, just blood, a lot of it. We stopped sleeping in turns and started sleeping in shifts, 2 hours each, no more. The generator's diesel reserve was still over half full, and we rationed power carefully. We only used lights in the interior corridors and the refrigerated feed building. Everything else stayed dark. The animals didn't seem to mind. They preferred it now, I think. On day 8, one of the lions was found dead. Malika, the older female, had her neck broken. It looked like she'd crashed into the interior gate trying to escape. We reviewed the manual latch logs. The lock had been released from inside, but Eli and I hadn't been near that sector in 3 days. The other 2 lions were unharmed but spooked, circling non-stop. We buried Malika near the elephant grove, under the ash tree where school groups used to gather for educational talks. We didn't speak, just dug until it was done. No words, just the work. That night, a low thud woke me. I was on the top floor of the aviary control center, using the old keeper observation room as my base. I scanned the monitors, only static. I looked down into the tree canopy where the glass dome arched across the bat corridor. There was movement, not the bats, something on the roof. I grabbed the binoculars and adjusted focus through the cracked dome glass. A man, barefoot, slouched, unmoving, stood in the middle of the skylight panels. His arms dangled at his sides, fingers curled like dry leaves. The lights behind him cast a long, distorted reflection across the plexiglass. Then, slowly, he pressed both palms against the glass and began to lean forward as if trying to push his way through. I radioed Eli, no response. I tried again, still nothing. I ran down the spiral stairs and crossed the central corridor past the penguin habitat. Everything was quiet, too quiet. The usual rustle of parrots and chittering monkeys was gone. Even the lemurs were silent. Then I heard something dragging on the stone tile, a scrape, then a shuffle. I ducked behind the polar tunnel divider and looked toward the maintenance locker. Eli stood at the far end of the hall, barefoot, shirt half torn, breathing shallow through his mouth. His face was pale, but his eyes were locked on me, awake, human, alive. He whispered, "Behind you." I turned and saw the janitor's assistant from reptile care, Adrian, what was left of him. His face had collapsed inward, jaw hanging sideways from tendon and rot. One arm had been ripped off below the elbow, the remaining one reached for my sleeve. I stumbled back, grabbed a broomstick from the wall and drove it into his chest with everything I had. It didn't stop him, nothing did. I grabbed Eli and we ran. We didn't make it far before he collapsed on the walkway near the panda trail. Eli had a gash across his ribs, deep, not from a bite, but from the steel fence wire that snapped when he forced one of the gates closed earlier. It had sliced clean across his side. The blood loss made him weak, slower. That's how Adrian must have gotten close. I carried him back to the lodge and dressed the wound with gauze and antiseptic. No fever, no infection, at least not yet. For the next 2 days, I did everything solo. I fed the primates and kept the reptiles warm using propane heaters. I reinforced the perimeter fencing with repurposed barriers from the rhino zone. At night, I listened for movement, always movement, never silence. The worst was day 11. A small group of infected, 4 or 5, somehow made it past the service road checkpoint near the train depot. I saw them on the hill just after dusk. Their shadows stretched long across the old abbey ruins. They didn't rush, didn't attack in a swarm. They just kept walking, foot after foot, until they reached the tiger enclosure. The old male, Jagan, didn't wait. He lunged at the glass before I could stop him, slammed into the barrier so hard I thought he'd break it. But the glass held. They pressed up against it, hands smearing red-black trails as they reached toward the sound. Jagan snarled and paced, but never looked away. One infected fell, crawled across the mulch, and began slapping the base of the barrier with both hands like a drumbeat. That noise continued for hours. By sunrise, 2 of the infected were gone, dragged off by something or someone. Jagan was still pacing. I threw a tarp over the glass from the outside, blocked the view. He finally stopped. That morning, I found 3 wallabies dead. Fence breach again. No infected this time, just exposure. The wind had dropped into freezing temperatures, and the heat lamps in their enclosure had failed. I spent the rest of the day pulling dead bodies out of the southern bird sanctuary. Some were birds, one wasn't. The infected don't scream. That's the worst part. You don't know they're near until they're on you, unless an animal alerts you first. And even then, you might be too late. That night, Eli finally stood on his own again. He looked thin, tired, but alive. We shared a can of preserved lentils by candlelight. I told him about the tigers, the wallabies, the slow grind of days bleeding into each other. He nodded but didn't say much. He was focused on something outside the window. "I think they're watching," he said. "Who?" "The animals, all of them. They don't look at us the same way anymore." He wasn't wrong. By day 12, something had changed. Not just in the infected, in the zoo itself. The animals were quieter, more deliberate. The orangutan, Dima, had stopped interacting with us entirely. The elephants refused to enter their night house. The wolves had started marking their territory along the visitor paths, as if reclaiming it from us. I didn't know it yet, but things were about to get worse. On the morning of day 13, I was doing rounds near the camel's enclosure when I heard the faint clatter of something metallic falling. It wasn't the usual sound of animals kicking feed bins or branches snapping. It had weight behind it. I crept toward the rear storage hut near the falconry stadium and waited. A few seconds later, I saw the shadow of a small figure duck behind the door. It wasn't infected. It moved too fast. I raised my radio to call Eli but hesitated. Then slowly, I stepped forward and pulled the door open. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a hoodie that used to be red, now soaked with rain and mud. Behind him, a woman, his mother I assumed, stood with her arms raised. A man stepped out from the shadows holding a crowbar. "Don't shoot. We're not sick. Please." I didn't have a gun in my hand, just the baton at my side, but the man looked like he'd been preparing that line for miles. I led them back to the service corridor, had them wait in the quarantine room we used for injured animals. I made them strip to underlayers and checked them over one by one. No bites, no bruising, no strange behavior, just exhaustion, raw, sunken eyes. The boy was the only one who didn't speak, just stared. Their names were Vincent and Camille, and the kid was Leo. They'd walked all the way from Ath, over 10 miles of back roads, staying off main highways. They used to visit Pairi Daiza every year and figured the walls and forests might provide more safety than the refugee zones they'd heard about in Namur. They said those camps weren't safe anymore, that people were disappearing inside them, that trucks were leaving full and coming back empty. Eli wasn't happy when I brought them back to the lodge. We had food, but not enough for guests. He said it plainly in front of them. "We feed what's here. That's the only reason we're still alive." Camille offered to work, to help clean, haul, do anything. Vincent said he'd do repairs or watch patrol. I didn't argue. We needed hands. We couldn't stay locked in forever. We assigned them to the southeast quadrant, the lemur area, petting zones, and parts of the bird gardens, mostly safe, low risk. I gave Vincent an old metal rake handle for defense and showed him how to identify an enclosure breach from signs in the dirt and tracks around the gates. That evening, Eli and I sat in silence by the orangutan dome. Dima watched us from his perch without blinking. He usually mimicked people, waving, nodding, copying gestures, but not now. Now he just stared. "You think we made a mistake?" Eli finally asked. "They're not infected," I said. "That's not what I asked." I didn't answer because I wasn't sure. On day 14, I was woken by screaming, not human. The sound of frantic, terrified animal calls echoed from the northern end of the zoo. Eli and I grabbed our lights and sprinted across the central walkway, past the monastery ruins and down the slope toward the lower enclosures. We saw Vincent first. He was bleeding from his shoulder, a deep gash across the collarbone. Camille was trying to drag him toward a drainage culvert behind the wallaby area. Leo was gone. She didn't see us at first. She was half crouched, one hand gripping the back of Vincent's jacket, the other dragging a length of broken hose they must have used as a sling. Vincent's head lolled forward, blood soaking through the collar of his coat and dripping onto the dirt with a steady patter. Camille's arms were shaking violently, her shoes slipping in the mud as she pulled him inch by inch across the path. Her eyes were wide but unfocused, like she hadn't blinked in a full minute. Then came the screams, high-pitched, frantic, not human. The wallabies, a whole cluster of them, had gathered in the open stretch of their exhibit, huddled together in a tight knot under the enclosure's sparse shelter. They were shrieking in short, panicked bursts, one after the other, their calls echoing off the stonework like an alarm bell. I knew that sound. I'd only heard it once before, when a dog had slipped into the enclosure a few years back and killed one of their own. This was worse. The screams were coming from the wallabies again, and from the red pandas nearby. The fence had been breached. I jumped the path railing and cut across the children's maze for a better view. Eli followed close behind, gripping the rifle tight against his chest. We reached the top of the viewing platform in time to see the full extent of it. The chain-link barrier between the petting zone and the wallaby pen had been torn nearly in half, not like it was cut clean, more like something pulled and pulled until the tension gave out. The lower half was twisted outward, jagged wires splayed like a broken ribcage. No idea how many had gotten in, maybe 5, maybe 10. I saw 4 immediately, 2 crawling through the torn netting of the petting zone, dragging their limbs like sea creatures pulled ashore, one limping through the mulch path on a clearly broken ankle, foot dragging sideways with every step, and another hunched low to the ground near the duck pond, its head moving in a slow, jerking rhythm like it was chewing something. They had eaten the goats. I saw one carcass, what was left of it, limp and torn open at the middle, white ribs exposed like piano keys. Another goat's body was pressed against the fence line, neck at an impossible angle. One of the infected was hunched over it, not moving, arms wrapped around the torso like it was trying to pull itself inside. The sounds coming from the wallaby pen changed then, from cries to sharp, choked grunts of pain. We looked down just in time to see a small wallaby trying to crawl away from the center of the group. Its back leg was twisted sideways, broken clean through. One of the infected had grabbed it by the hindquarters and was dragging it backward across the dirt. The wallaby kicked and thrashed, but it didn't have the strength. Its eyes were wide, mouth open, struggling to breathe as its body was pulled into the open. I didn't think. I jumped down the side of the railing and sprinted toward it. I charged the one nearest and drove my baton down into its skull. It didn't even react. Its hands never let go of the wallaby. I hit it again, this time in the jaw, then pinned it under my knee and twisted the baton hard across the side of its neck. The vertebrae cracked after 3 turns, but even then it took a few seconds before it stopped twitching. Eli came behind me, the rifle raised. Another infected, the one crawling along the mulch trail, was almost on top of me. Eli fired once, clean, center of the forehead. The body folded backward and collapsed face first into the wet leaves. We dragged Vincent into the keeper tunnel and barred the door behind us with an old equipment cart. Camille helped, barely able to breathe, her hands shaking as she held Vincent's weight under his good arm. Once we were inside, we checked the wound. Deep, but not a bite, just a long, sharp laceration that had gone through skin and muscle. The blood was bright and steady, probably a fence spike or piece of shrapnel from the broken gate. Leo was still missing. Camille kept calling for him, short, panicked bursts of his name, despite our efforts to keep her quiet. I told her to stay with her husband, keep pressure on the wound, and wait for my signal. I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed a crowbar and a flashlight and headed back out. The exhibit paths had become a nightmare. The layout that once guided visitors gently from one happy animal zone to the next now felt like a trap. So many dead ends. So many blind corners. Every fake boulder, every topiary arch could be hiding something now. I moved fast, keeping low, flashlight off. The distant sound of splashing from the duck pond made my stomach turn. I passed a mangled signpost reading "Discover the Red Pandas" and followed the slope up to the upper viewing platform. The fence had been broken here too, though not completely, just enough for a child to slip through. I found Leo curled up behind the koi feeding platform. His hoodie was soaked through. He was clutching the support beam with both arms, trying to disappear into the concrete. One of the red pandas was beside him, pressed into the corner, wheezing softly. Its body was heaving with every breath, side streaked with blood. Another panda lay close by, unmoving, one paw extended toward the feeding bowl. The smell hit me first, iron and musk, like old copper. I knelt down and reached out to him slowly. Leo didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He just whispered. I tried to stop them. His hands were smeared with blood, not his own. There were scratch marks on his palms, defensive wounds. He must have thrown rocks, sticks, anything he could find to distract them. Maybe that's why the infected were scattered. Maybe he'd actually drawn them away, even just for a minute. I picked him up and carried him out, one arm under his knees, the other bracing his head against my shoulder. He didn't say another word. We lost 5 animals that night. 3 wallabies, 2 red pandas, 1 more goat had to be put down later due to internal injuries. Vincent's wound wasn't fatal, but it kept him bedbound. Camille stayed at his side. Leo stayed with us most of the time, refusing to speak more than a few words. The days got colder after that. We spent most of day 15 burning infected corpses. We used the maintenance incinerator near the feed prep warehouse. Originally built for waste and expired food, it had just enough room to cremate 1 body at a time. It took hours. Eli watched the flames from a distance. He didn't speak until I shut the doors. They don't stop, he muttered. They don't get tired. They just come. I know. No, you don't. You're still hoping they won't. I know they will. That's the difference. I didn't argue, because he was right. That night, Dima broke the interior panel to his habitat. I saw it on the infrared feed, his body smashing into the inner wall over and over again. Not violently, not like panic. Methodically, once every 10 seconds. Bang, back away, bang again. Eli checked the logs. The last time the doors were opened had been before the outbreak. The panel was rated for 300 pounds of force. Dima weighed 280. After the 6th hit, the wall buckled. He didn't escape. But he did something stranger. He climbed to the top of his structure, tore the camouflage fabric off the skylight, and began hurling branches at the reinforced glass. Not enough to break it, not even close. But he kept doing it, for hours. On day 16, we found another breach near the old African train ride. Tracks led from the perimeter fence all the way through the dried riverbed behind the Pelican Zone. Whoever it was, or whatever, they weren't in a hurry. We found scraps of military camouflage caught on the shrubs and a torn med pack stained dark, but no body. That same day, a group of deer from the open woodland sector broke through into the flamingo habitat. Normally, they wouldn't go near that area, but something had spooked them, hard. The flamingos were gone. Just feathers, red pools, trampled soil, and drag marks that ended at the pond's edge. We didn't find the infected that did it. We didn't find the flamingos. Only a trail of blood that led into the reeds and vanished. That evening, Vincent tried to stand and collapsed. I carried him to the cold storage area to keep his fever down. We didn't have antibiotics, just gauze, antiseptic, and water. He didn't complain. Just gripped my wrist once, hard, and whispered, "Don't let my kids see me turn." I didn't respond. I didn't want to. We posted signs near the gates in 6 languages. No entry, quarantine in effect, do not cross. But no one read signs anymore. People were desperate, or stupid, or both. By day 17, food was running thin. We'd rationed everything, meat, produce, dry pellets for the herbivores, but with no staff to help manage portions, the feeding schedules were breaking down. The elephants began pushing harder against the enclosure gates. The lions paced non-stop. The bears had stopped emerging from their dens entirely. Camille started crying while feeding the lemurs. She never said why. She just stood there, dry corn pellets falling from the tin can into the straw as the lemurs watched her without moving. None of them approached. They didn't look afraid, just uninterested or resigned. By day 19, even the animals that hadn't been directly harmed were changing. Hunger was setting in, not just for us, but for them. We had stretched supplies as far as possible. The carnivores were down to half rations every other day. The big cats grew more restless with each passing night, especially when they smelled blood or death in the air. That morning, I found 2 of the ibex dead in the Himalayan zone. One had a torn throat. The other was partially eaten. There were no signs of human interference, no infected footprints. The blood was fresh, still tacky. One of the snow leopards must have gotten out, slipped through the service hatch where the gate had weakened from days of stress. The snow leopard was back in its pen when I arrived, sitting in the corner like nothing had happened. Blood smeared down its chin. I didn't blame it. It was hungry. It followed instinct. In the wild, it would have done the same thing. But this wasn't the wild. Not really. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, Eli came running from the primate corridor, calling my name. I followed him down the narrow emergency walkway, past the old enclosure signs and faded tourist displays. He led me to the northern elephant gate, and my heart sank. The outer fence was gone. Not collapsed. Torn. A gaping hole more than 12 feet wide. Steel bars twisted outward like something or someone had rammed it repeatedly until it gave. Fresh mud was scattered all around the breach. Deep footprints, a mess of tusk scrapes on the concrete edge. They were gone. Both elephants. We followed the tracks through the rear meadow where we used to hold group feedings for visitors. The trail vanished into the trees beyond the enclosure. No signs of struggle. No blood. They had simply left. Eli didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at the gap in the fence like he was seeing something I couldn't. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, but I already knew. If they were leaving, maybe we should too, but I wasn't ready. That night, I woke to the sound of howling. Not wolves, not monkeys. It was a scream. Deep, angry, animal, but not. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed the flashlight and followed the noise toward the south end of the zoo, the lions. It was coming from the lions. I found Camille there already, crouched near the observation window. She didn't look at me when I approached, just kept her eyes locked on the enclosure. Inside, 2 of the lionesses were circling the male, fast, aggressive. One lunged. The male roared and swatted her down with brutal force, but the other pounced from behind, catching his hindquarters. It wasn't a play fight. It wasn't dominance behavior. This was real, raw, desperate. They were starving. I watched in stunned silence as the 3 animals turned on one another. There wasn't enough room to escape, no trees to climb, no river to dive into, just stone walls and straw. Nature doesn't wait for zookeepers to intervene when everything falls apart. The next morning we found the male dead, torn throat, ribcage exposed. One of the lionesses had a broken leg. The third paced alone, silent, eyes tracking every movement from outside the enclosure. She didn't roar, she didn't blink, she just watched. We burned the male. Couldn't risk scavengers dragging pieces of him into other areas. Couldn't risk the smell bringing more infected. The following day we lost the flamingo pond entirely. Not from infected, not directly. The raccoons broke into the feed building again, tipped over bins, shredded dry pellets, pulled sacks of corn apart. I hadn't seen them in days and assumed they'd fled like the elephants, but now they were back, and they weren't alone. A pack of foxes, thin, ribs showing, had followed the raccoons into the zoo, probably from the fields beyond the forest. They chased a group of flamingos out of the pond, and the birds couldn't fly fast enough to clear the fencing. 2 died in the scramble. Another limped around the edge of the water, wing dragging uselessly behind it. We tried to catch it, but it kept darting just out of reach. Eli eventually brought out a net and cornered it near the waterfall. As he held the injured bird, I noticed blood staining the feathers, not from the wing, but from the leg. A clean puncture, probably from a fox's teeth. "Should we keep trying to fix this?" he asked. "Any of it?" I didn't answer. We released the surviving flamingos into the larger upper pond and reinforced the entryway with leftover fencing from the playground zone. It wasn't ideal, but it bought us time. That night, we held a meeting inside the Keeper cafeteria. Camille and Leo were there. Vincent was still recovering, though he sat propped in a chair near the back. I laid it out plain. If the infected breach the inner sectors again, we'll have to retreat to the cellar, block it from the inside and wait it out. For how long? Camille asked. Until the broadcasts come back, or we get word from the outside, or we don't. Vincent nodded, slow. We've made it this far. I say we stay. Camille looked unsure. Her hands clutched Leo's arm tight, but she didn't argue. That was day 21. On day 22, the howler monkeys broke out of their enclosure. We don't know how. The locks weren't broken. No exterior damage. It's like they coordinated, used the vines and pipes to wedge the doors open just enough to squeeze through. We found 3 of them clinging to the archway over the visitor path, screaming down at a pair of infected that had wandered into the primate zone. The infected didn't react. They never do. One eventually walked directly under the monkeys, and one of them jumped down onto its back, clawed and bit and screamed until the infected finally collapsed under its weight. We couldn't retrieve the monkey's body. The infected rolled over, grabbed it by the neck, and didn't let go. That night, I locked every secondary access gate to the primate sector. I posted signs. Even Leo knew not to wander close. The animals weren't just panicked anymore. They were defending territory. By day 23, even the animals that hadn't shown aggression before were acting strangely. The giraffes refused to come near their usual feed station. One of them kicked down the fence panel near the transfer corridor and bolted across the courtyard, trampling the flower beds. It ran straight toward the park entrance and slammed into the gate with enough force to bend the upper bar. Then it ran. Out. Gone. We never saw it again. By midday, the zebra enclosure had emptied. 2 fences cut, fresh hoofprints across the public plaza near the monkey bridge. They were heading east, following the elephant's path. We debated chasing after them, tried to track one of the younger mares for half a mile, but the trail vanished in the undergrowth, and the forest grew too quiet. Eli said we should let them go. They don't belong in cages anymore, he said. Neither did we, maybe. On day 24, I found Dima lying in the corner of his habitat. He wasn't moving. I radioed Eli. We climbed inside together carefully, keeping our backs to the concrete wall. No signs of violence, no blood, just stillness. Eli checked his breathing, shallow, weak. He hasn't eaten in days, Eli said. I looked around. The fruits we'd left were untouched. Bananas, apples, chopped melon, all rotting in the corner. We left him there. Didn't move the body. Didn't clean the enclosure. We just closed the gate behind us and walked away. Day 25 began like most days by that point, with the sound of something breaking. I had just finished loading the last of the preserved fish into the penguin prep freezer, less for the penguins now and more as a backup meat supply, when the ground beneath the main plaza echoed with a dull metallic clang, not a scream, not the sound of gates rattling or doors swinging open in the wind. This was heavier, sharper. I knew immediately it was coming from the main entrance. The front gates had held until now. 14 feet of reinforced steel with backup braces we'd installed ourselves using scavenged materials from the landscaping depot, but nothing holds forever. I made it to the southern watch point and peered through the narrow slits left between planks of nailed fencing. The outer square was full, at least a dozen of them now, maybe more coming down the tree line. Some were dragging their limbs across the cobblestones like they'd been crawling for days. Others still had remnants of uniforms, delivery drivers, postal workers, even a man in a zoo volunteer vest. Their hands beat a rhythm against the gate, not coordinated, not fast, just constant. Eli was already there, checking the pressure gauges we had rigged from the elephant paddock sensors. We'd attached seismic alarms to warn us of heavy movement. The readings were redlining. "Gates going soon," he said flatly. "How many? Does it matter?" I didn't answer. I just walked back towards the keeper dorms and began clearing the path to the fallback room beneath the veterinary wing. We'd only used it once before, back during a lightning storm when the power grid shorted out. It wasn't meant to house people, but it was sealed, windowless, and reinforced with double concrete walls. No direct exits. A tomb if things went badly. Camille and Leo helped carry supplies. Vincent tried to stand but collapsed again. We moved him on a cart. Leo insisted on pushing it himself, even though the wheels barely turned and he had to keep stopping every few feet to catch his breath. He never said a word. By late afternoon, the infected at the gate had doubled. They weren't breaking through by force, they were weakening the supports. Over time, slowly, with each hand pressed against the barrier, they tilted the weight of that crowd forward like a tide. We had one option left: draw them away. I turned the loudspeaker system back on for the first time since the third day of the outbreak. The speakers along the gondola bridge and Parrot House still worked, barely. I cued an old children's animal facts recording from the visitor center. Did you know a gorilla's grip is strong enough to bend a metal bar? And set it to loop at maximum volume. The sound echoed across the park like some cursed announcement from a world that didn't exist anymore. The infected turned. It worked. Eli and I climbed the treetop rope path above the water garden and waited. From there we watched as the crowd swarmed the audio zone, their blank faces rising toward the speakers like disciples at a sermon. Some stumbled into the koi pond, others pushed against the old glass railing until it buckled. The distraction gave us time, but only minutes. I sprinted across the upper ridge trail, passing enclosures that were now mostly empty. The deer gone. The zebras vanished. The elephants still missing. I passed the lion zone and saw only one lioness remaining, lying in the corner, ribs showing, eyes closed. When I reached the main plaza again, the gates were half open, not breached, just sagging. The infected were squeezing through the lowest corner, one at a time, like water finding the weakest point in a dam. We couldn't stop them. I ran back, cutting across the children's maze, through the Lima Pass and down to the cellar. By the time I closed the hatch behind me, I could already hear the calls of the infected bouncing down the corridor. We waited in darkness. The room had no lights, no windows, just storage racks and animal crates. Camille held Leo close. Vincent had stopped speaking. Eli stood near the hatch, listening to every sound with his hands pressed flat against the wall. Outside, the chaos spread. I could hear the orangutans screaming again, then silence. I could hear glass breaking, metal tearing, distant animal cries suddenly cut short. Hours passed. Eventually, Camille drifted off. Leo too. I stayed awake, counting, listening. Day 26 passed underground. By the time we emerged late on day 27, the park was gone. Not destroyed, not leveled, but empty. Hollow. The kind of silence that feels loud. The infected had moved on. Why, I don't know. Maybe the sound stopped. Maybe they followed a new noise in the distance. Maybe they just drifted. That's what they did. No goals, no patterns, just movement. We stepped out into the main corridor and found the monkey bridges torn, the bird domes shattered. The penguin tanks were cracked and drained. The big cats were gone. Only the pacing marks in the dirt remained, like shadows of things that once were. Dima was gone too, not his body, his enclosure. The entire front panel had collapsed inward. Inside, nothing. We spent the next 2 days cleaning what we could, salvaging what food remained, reinforcing the cellar for the next time we'd need it. There would be a next time. I didn't kid myself about that anymore. Camille asked if we should try to leave. Vincent was strong enough to walk again, barely. Leo had grown quieter, but not weaker. I don't think we'd get far, I told her. She nodded. Then we stay. We made a new map of what sectors still held, which fences had collapsed, which habitat still had animal life, a few lemurs, some birds, the crocodile, somehow still alive. The wolves, maybe. Tracks near the eastern creek hinted they'd returned, or had never left. Day 30 came without warning. No final attack, no sudden breach, just fog, the kind that rolls in off the fields without a sound, turning everything grey. I stood at the high overlook near the abbey ruins, looking down at what was left of Pairi Daiza. The paths were cracked, the signs faded, the statues chipped and blackened, but the bones of the place remained. Eli stood beside me, binoculars in hand. I think I saw one of the pandas, he said, just before the mist came in. Alive? I think so. We stood there, side by side, and listened. No helicopters, no gunfire, no engines. Just birdsong. Real birdsong. A few sparrows in the rafters of the old monastery chirping like nothing had changed, like they didn't care about outbreaks or fences or human cruelty, like they were just waiting for us to get out of their way. 30 days, Eli said. Yeah, we made it. For now. And that's the truth of it. We didn't save the zoo, we didn't rescue the world. We just endured, held the line a little longer than most, protected what we could. Some animals died, some ran, some survived by their own instincts, same as us. Now we wait for the next breach, the next nightfall, the next bad decision by someone desperate enough to think this place is still safe. But until then, the gates are sealed, the cellars stocked, the wolves are watching from the tree line, and we are still here, alive, for now. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.